Um, and it's great to be here with you all. I am excited to talk a little bit about this. The topic of the day is removing the emotion from pay, a data-driven approach to manager compensation decisions. Now, this was, truth be told, a little bit of a clickbait. Removing the emotion from pay. I'm not sure that's possible to completely remove all emotion from pay. And in fact, I'm not sure that's even desirable. We want some emotion when it comes to pay and the connection that we feel to our organizations that we work for. But there is an element of where emotion can distract from good decision making. And that's what I want to focus on a little bit today. Again, I want to reiterate what Rod said earlier. Feel free to chime in. If I happen to miss any hands being raised, then take yourself off mute. This can be a discussion as we go. I don't mind that at all. All right. Well, let's dive in. These are what I consider the four forces behind every strong pay decision. So let's go through these one by one. And as we go through the rest of the slides, try to remember these four forces because I'll be leaning back on them as we go. But the first of which is the market. Of course, we need to know what the market is paying for each role. Compensation teams spend the vast majority of their time benchmarking roles, studying salary surveys, reading job descriptions, and matching to the right market data. So that's an important part of compensation. Another important piece is internal equity. This is how we compare within our own organizations to like roles, whether they're the exact same roles, similar roles in terms of levels, similar roles on teams. That's what we call internal equity. There are lots of different ways to measure that. Perhaps the most common is the compa ratio. If some of you have heard of that, that's just the relationship between one's salary and that market data point. And so you can aggregate those numbers in lots of different ways and determine, okay, which groups or which individuals might be out of whack from each other within the organization. A lot of organizations, most, I would say, at least most that I've worked for, consider performance to also be one of the four forces behind strong pay decisions. But that's not true of every organization. You might work for an organization that bases pay decisions more on tenure or more on skills, more on years of experience and those sorts of things. But we're going to go with performance today. You can replace it with whatever your organization tends to lean on. And then finally, the last force behind a good, strong pay decision is your compensation philosophy. And that philosophy can vary from organization to organization. I've left twice now in the course of my career. I've left, in fact, when I left Rod Lacey years ago, I left and went to another organization that paid me less. And they were just flat out honest about that being their compensation philosophy. So I left for a pay decrease. And that is fine. That is just fine. So long as decisions that are being made are consistent with that compensation philosophy and whatever that is. So the important thing here is that managers and HR or the compensation team are in alignment on these four data points when it comes to making smart and wise pay decisions. And when you're focused on the four decision points, these four forces, that tends to remove some of the emotion out of arguments or the need to give pay increases to certain people and stuff. So these are the four decision points. We're going to lean on that. I want to start here though. This is my AI created image here. I love it. Yeah, and I loved it so much I just couldn't take it out. We've got a man standing in the middle of a table, and AI is not perfect. That's my proof of it. All right. I once was meeting with a good friend of mine, and we were doing lunch together. He was helping me, giving me some advice, and he shared this story with me. It's a hypothetical story, not a true story, but he was just trying to use a story to drive a point home. He says, Dallin, if if a VP of another department comes into me and says, I just saved the company $500,000, and I want to now take 20% of that, $100,000 of it, and give it to the people on my team that were a part of the project that helped save the money, and give it to them in the form of pay increases. And he says, if I were to say no to that, like I would get laughed out of the room. I would get laughed out of the room. And he was the head of HR, and so he's thinking, if I'm in the front of the all the other executive team, and they come to me and say, hey, $500,000 savings, we want to give 20% of it to the people, that's a no-brainer. Great. But herein lies the problem between um, some of what the HR view of things, and in this case, my compensation mind was just going crazy. Like, oh man, this is fraught with problems. And of course, I'm getting emotional, right? I'm getting emotional over this proposal. And the VP that's coming in proposing this, he's probably coming in, he or she's coming in with their own emotions, and they're charged, and they're talking about, and they're coming in prepared to defend their reasoning for giving this pay increase to employees. Now, put aside for a second that there are good ways to go about this, and we can talk about that. But the proposal was specifically to give them base pay increases. Now, as we think back on those four forces that we just talked through, um, only one of those four forces is really being focused on in this proposal, and that's the performance, right? The performance of the employees. And the others are completely being ignored, and therefore relying heavily on emotion to get this approved, because some of these other four forces are being completely ignored. Data is being ignored. And so focusing too heavily on one force might cause for some bad decisions to be made. I want to talk a little bit about now the off-cycle conversations that throughout my career I've been a part of as it comes to off-cycle requests from managers coming to HR who come in charged with emotion. They want to give a pay increase. Call it whatever you want. Call it an equity adjustment. Call it a performance increase. Call it whatever you want. But they come in and they say, hey, I want to give a pay increase to Alex, we're going to call him. Alex has done just such a great job, and I fear, though, that he's going to leave. He comes in with all these reasons. Here's what it might look like from the manager's perspective. If we don't take care of Alex, he's going to leave. He's critical to our objectives this year. We've got some critical projects, and Alex is the go-to expert on all of these projects. Alex, you'll often hear it say, it's kind of a joke in HR sometimes even. It's like, Alex is my top performer. They're always the top performer, right? And always the top performer, and I've got to take care of him. If I lose him, we are in a world of hurt. It'll cost more. It'll cost more to replace him than to just approve the $10,000 increase that I'm proposing here. And then of course there's always they often revert to the blame game, right? Like, hey, if I had just had enough money during the merit cycle, this last merit cycle, this wouldn't be a problem. This wouldn't be a problem. So not my problem. This is HR, this is finance, it's whoever put that budget together. And of course, It's got to happen now. I need this approved now. Every argument here is emotionally charged. True. I'm not saying that they're not true, but highly emotional, and they come in ready to argue. And of course, here's what HR hears, right? Here's what HR is hearing. They hear, if you say no, I'm going to escalate this. I'm going to escalate it, and I'm going to get it done anyways. Um, and to be honest, they have good arguments, and whoever they argue them to, whoever they take those arguments to, they're probably going to get what they want out of it. What HR's thinking in their head, though, as these arguments are coming to them, and if we have HR people on, I would love to hear what you think. But what I often hear is, hey, and or what I often turn to, I've turned to data, and I go off immediately, and I'm like, I'm going to try to find data that is going to that is going to yeah prove me right, prove me right that this particular individual does not deserve the increase that is being recommended. I'll often turn to the last merit cycle and see, okay, what was their performance review? What did that look like? Were they, in fact, the highest rated? Did they, in fact, get even the highest pay increase at that time? I often find that that's not the case. Um, these this recommendation is it's going to solve a short-term problem but create long-term equity issues. That's what's going through my mind. In a few months, this manager will be asking for another increase to fix the inequity that they just created. All these things going through my mind as I get emotionally charged. So truth is that both are right. The problem lies in the way that we're going about getting this done, right? Both are right. Let's just jump real quickly to this slide. If you're a manager and you happen to come across, or HR were to provide you with data that looks like this, I'm wondering how it might change your approach to this need for an off-cycle equity or performance adjustment. What I want to do is let me explain this real quickly and what this is. So this is something that I call the turnover matrix. On the the vertical axis, we've got performance. We've got low performers, medium performers, and high performers. And then on the horizontal axis, we've got where they're at in relation to the market, or in this case, we'll call it their position in their range, whether that's low, mid, or high. And in the middle, we have turnover rates. The turnover rates, and that's an important distinction. So in other words, high performers low in the range, and this is made up data, but it's somewhat consistent to what I see at a lot of organizations. Not every organization, but a lot of organizations, you'll see data like this, where high performers might be leaving you, high performers low in the range might be leaving you at the rate of 40%. Now compare that to high performers high in the range, leaving you at a rate of 12%. Now, if a manager were to have this kind of data, and they started to look at this more like maybe a business owner would, and they start to think of, okay, what is the best usage of the money that I'm requesting? How would that influence the manager's decision, if at all? If at all. I have found, however, that throughout the course of my career, sharing data like this with managers gets them thinking in a new light. Instead of them coming in now all emotionally charged into this meeting with HR or with the compensation team, they will come in with the need to or the desire to take a look at this and say, okay, let's put the numbers, let's crunch some numbers. If we were to take $10,000 and give it to this individual, depending on where they land in the table, what's that going to do? Is that going to move them out of one box and into another, and therefore the likelihood of them leaving actually reduces in half? Or what's going to happen, and does that become a good use of our money? By the way, $10,000 pay increase, right? That argument of, hey, let's give a $10,000 pay increase. It's going to be cheaper than having to hire somebody new. In our minds, when we hear that, we think $10,000 this year, right? $10,000 next year. And going back to that example, of course, of the $500,000 savings, if I give 100,000 of it away in the form of base pay increases, that's year one. Year two is another $100,000, and year three, in fact, it's $103,000 if they all got 3% increases, and it just goes on and on. And over the course of the next 4 to 5 years, you've eaten up the savings altogether. Um, but if we were to think of this and take a more, business leader approach, maybe it's like a CFO would look at this in terms of an investment. So, the CFO never asks, how do we spend this budget, now that we have it? Instead, they're thinking, where can I get the highest rate of return? Where can I get the highest return on this spend? And that same lens can be used when it comes to pay increases for our employees, right? If we applied that same discussion to salary budgets, maybe you have an off-cycle budget that's given to your leaders, then using a tool like this or using data that's available to your HR team, but they just might not be using it like they could. Using data like this might actually help them to calculate an actual rate of return on the spend of that, in this case, proposed $10,000. And they might be able to take a look at this and say, hey, does this really make sense? So the question isn't how much can we give, it's where does this dollar create the most value for the business? When managers and HR ask that question together with data, compensation becomes a competitive advantage. So HR, all you HR leaders, I'm calling on you to come prepared and be prepared at all times for these conversations. The old conversation may have looked reactive. It may have looked something like what you see on the left-hand side of this slide, highly emotionally charged, one against another. But if HR came prepared with, and the manager came prepared with their data rather than just their emotion, and here are some things that data that can remove some of the emotion from this conversation. Bring a turnover matrix, bring time to fill savings. In other words, if we were to lose this person, if we didn't give this pay increase and lose this person, how long is it going to take us to backfill, and what's that going to do to the business? Truth be told, there's some savings there, right? Even and so factoring in some of the savings, factoring in the costs that might hit the company as well. HR put together a 3-year cost analysis of pay increases versus backfill. So what's the difference between giving a $10,000 pay increase to Alex versus not, and like maybe losing Alex? And what's that going to look like now over the course of the next 3 years? Yeah, these are data points that turn the discussion from I've got to have this, I've got to have it now, I've got to have it today. Otherwise, the company is sunk. I've been told in my career that I have single-handedly broken an organization, that I have brought an organization to its knees because of decisions, like this. And truth be told, that was not the case. But that's the type of emotion that I made the mistake of bringing on my end, as well as the manager on their end. So managers can bring performance context, project criticality to the table. They should also be prepared to bring financial impact of potential project delays to the table should Alex leave. Bringing data to the table will help curb some of the highly emotionally charged conversations that we often find ourselves in when it comes to managers and HR. Um, Here's an idea that I want to just throw out to everybody too that might help with this. Some of you may work for an organization where you have like a promotion budget that can be used maybe at certain times throughout the year, maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's just throughout the entire year, but you might have a promotion budget or an off-cycle pay increase budget. I'm not talking the merit budget at this time, but the off-cycle pay increases that happen at many organizations. What I have found throughout my career is that most organizations, yours might be different, but I've found that most organizations will centralize that budget. I propose to decentralize that budget and put it at some level of the leadership. Now, it could be even if it's at the highest level, even if it's at the executive level, that's fine. But break it down to some level deep into the organization, even if it's as shallow as the executive level. That's better than centralizing it at the top. And the reason I say that is because I find that when it's centralized, again, it's an emotion builder. It's just charging all those managers who now need to give a promotion or want to give a pay increase to somebody that they just now have to fight for their share of the pie. And so they come in emotionally charged to do so. Guns ablazed, swords are drawn, and and they come in ready to get not just what should proportionately be their share of the pie, but they probably don't even realize it, that they're wanting more. Like they want to get, because it's probably, they think of it as a good sign of a good leader to go in and fight for their people and get more money. But is that really what's good for the organization? And is it doing what's good for the total organization really our jobs as leaders of the organization? I have found that breaking those budgets out to some level below kind of stems some of that. They have more control. It empowers that organization a little bit more. And they have a tendency to just now naturally want to come in with more data to propose the off-cycle increases or promotions. I'm not saying that they have complete control of that budget, but I am suggesting that even though HR, finance, and leadership still has to approve what they're putting forth, still have to approve the promotions that are being recommended or the off-cycle increases, but they have to come in and justify it. And instead of trying to now argue for a larger share than they proportionately should get, they get the portion that they're allotted to. And if they overspend, or excuse me, if they use up their budget unwisely, they're accountable, right? So that's the beauty of this system I've found, is that managers now know this. They can't now say and blame it on HR and say, or finance, and say, hey, it's because they didn't give me the money that I can't promote so and so. Instead, it's I gotta be wise with how I spend this money. Just an idea, a thought that and a method that I've found has been very helpful throughout my career. All right. I want to now shift gears a little bit and talk a little about for the last few minutes here, just the actual conversation that takes place. Again, we're talking about the emotion that is tied to pay, and so much of that emotion, um, and I also mentioned earlier, that emotion can be good, especially on the part of the recipient. But the way the manager communicates a pay increase to an employee can either make or break that connection that we're striving for between the recipient of the pay increase, and the organization itself. And I say that very carefully because the goal is not to create a connection between the employee and you as the leader. You're wanting to create a connection as a manager. You're wanting to create a connection between the employee and the organization to give them a sense of belonging and almost reducing the distance that they feel in that org chart and getting them some sort of connection. Because when there's distance between where they're at and the top layers of the org chart, not just real distance, but emotional distance, that's when entitlement sets in, and that's when they become all about themselves, and that's what we want to avoid. So here's a framework, um, just a high level framework. There's a lot that I could put into a more detailed framework, but I'm just going to make this high level. So first of all, this idea of focus on the paycheck, not the percentage. I think that HR's done a disservice to itself over the years of being so focused on the percentage of increases. Hey, I'm giving you a 5% increase. That's above average. That's above normal. No mention of why that increase is really happening. It could be that remember the four forces. It could be that they're behind market, and they're saying, hey, congratulations, you are so valuable to us. We're giving you a 5% increase. And that's just not where the value of the employee is. When was the last time you were applying for a job and the organization that you're interviewing with said, how big was your last increase? Or what percentage increase did you get? They don't care. They don't care at all. They're trying, although now there's some laws around it, but they're trying to get to where, what pay is going to be required of you to get you. So that's really all that matters. What matters is the paycheck, the size of the paycheck, not the size of the percentage. I would lead instead with, hey, you're getting an increase. Your new salary is X, and just call it out. And they can calculate the percentage, but what they're wanting to do there is often compare. Is my percentage bigger than everybody else's? And so for some crazy reason to me, that gives them value. I don't understand it. Instead, we want the value to be tied to the paycheck. I would prefer the question of how does my pay relate in comparison to others, but truthfully told, the answer to that question is, well, let's talk about where it falls in the market. Let's tell you where it's at in relation to your range, midpoints, and minimums and maximums. Assuming that your organization is transparent with those things, you'll have to follow your organization's philosophy there. I'm a proponent of transparency in that regard, but only when it's right for the organization. Another common mistake I see with managers is they throw HR or finance or whoever's in charge of the budget under the bus. I wanted to give you more, but I couldn't. I wanted to do more. HR wouldn't let me. I wanted to do more, but I didn't have enough budget. That can be one of the most damaging things to say to an employee in terms of your goal to connect them to the organization. You're making it all about you, to be honest. You're making it all about, hey, I want to be liked as a manager. That's my first goal, as opposed to trying to connect the employee to the organization. Finally, no surprises. I'm sure you've heard this throughout your career, but no surprises. Nobody should be in a pay increase decision and they're hearing for the first time what their performance is. That should be a conversation that's happening throughout the year. What great managers say. I'm going to conclude here in just a quick second, but anchor things to total compensation, connect pay to performance, and be specific as to what their contributions were. Let them know that they've earned their pay increase. Everybody wants to hear that, or they've earned their actual pay, whatever that paycheck is, rather. When appropriate, acknowledge market context. We talked about that, and open the path forward. Here's what would need to happen for your composition to grow further. HR, I'm calling on you again to be the strategic advisor, move from gatekeeper to guide, and do that by being data driven. You got to share the data. Um, and of course, get your organization to a point where it's ready to see that data, where they understand what comp ratios are, that they understand that the compensation philosophy, the pay philosophy of the organization is to promote internal equity, talk about how you measure those things, and then build the processes that promote all of those things that are in your compensation philosophy. Um, Own the outcome together. You're a team. Let's end with this. Pay is emotional. That's kind of the point. We want it to be emotional, but we want it to be emotional on the part of the recipient. You want that connection, that tie of, oh, wow, I've earned this. I feel good about my pay. I feel good about what the organization's doing for me. That emotion is good. It can be good for, especially for those high performers. They should feel valued. They should feel connected to the organization. And a well-handled decision on the part of the manager, it does. It builds loyalty, trust, and motivation to do better. Um, but emotion is not in the actual decision making. It shouldn't be, at least. It should be data driven. And to be honest, at least I, as an employee, I love it when a manager says, hey, here's what the data says and why we're giving you an increase. It's because your performance is here, your ranges say this, and they've completely taken their own subjectivity out of it. I love that. I love that message to me. It makes me actually feel like, okay, I have earned this. Remember the four forces. Um, Build processes that support data-driven decision making. The goal, here's my final message. The goal was never to remove emotion from pay. The goal is to use data and process to make decisions worthy of the emotional weight they carry so that when an employee feels valued, it's real, it's fair, and it lasts.